Part 4 of our retro on the personnel decisions surrounding LeBron James' career, we are moving into Miami. Miami makes one move before getting the big three this offseason, and that is trading away the draft pick that would be Eric Bledsoe. In attempts to free up more cap space, the Heat pay a first-round pick, the 2010 18th overall pick, Eric Bledsoe, to move off of Daquan Cook's salary. In return, they get a second-round pick, and this whole deal saves them about $3 million. Which is not a lot, but at the time, max salaries were $16 million. That's right, if the big three had signed for full maxes, they'd be making the same amount as Lou Dort is currently making this season. Instead, each of the big three takes a little bit of a pay cut and end up making $14.5 million or $14 million in Wade's case, which means they're all getting paid less than the Lakers are currently paying Dorian Finney-Smith. And as a combined trio, they're getting paid less than the Blazers are currently paying DeAndre Ayton. But something else happens between LeBron James' decision and the grand unveiling of the big three a few days later. The thing that happens is a sign and trade. Bosh and LeBron both don't just sign with Miami. Instead, they sign with their current teams and are traded. Now, I've been looking to see who's like the culprit to blame for this. Some say it's Clutch that, wanted to get LeBron the most money. Some point to Toronto, who was really trying to figure out a way to get something back for Bosh. Either way, LeBron signs a 6-year deal with Cleveland with an opt-out after year 4 and gets traded to Miami. Now, this move initially flies under the radar. Toronto gets sent both Miami's 2011 pick and Toronto's own 2011 pick back. Cleveland gets 2013 and 2015 of Miami, as well as 2 seconds and the rights to swap in 2012. Giving up 4 firsts and 2 seconds for LeBron and Bosh is a move you make 100 times out of 100. But if you don't have to, if you're just able to sign them, you don't do it. It's an asset play, and if you include those picks and the Bledsoe pick, they've given up 5 firsts. And while most of those picks don't go on to be much, the Raptors pick was top 5. They used to select Jonas Valanciunas. Now, in a world where Toronto doesn't get their pick back, maybe, just maybe, they try to be a little bit more competitive the next season. Maybe it ends up being the 9th pick in Kemba Walker. Maybe it's the 11th pick in Klay Thompson. Maybe it's number 15 and it's Kawhi Leonard. Or maybe it's 6 and Jan Vesely, and none of this matters. But I do think the decision to make this a sign trade versus just signing with Miami does cost the Heat a lot. It gives up draft capital, gives up flexibility, gives up optionality to trade these picks for other players. Miami also gives up on and jettisons Michael Beasley. They send him and cash for 2 future second-round picks. Now, I know Beasley never fully pans out as anything, but he was the second-round pick 2 years prior. He's just 22 years old. He goes on and drops 19 points per game for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Sure, the fit in Miami wouldn't have been great, but to have to pay cash and only get 2 second rounds for him, it's a loss. But they had to move him out to go sign Mike Miller, which is where the bulk of Miami's free agency money would go to after, of course, the big three. In addition to Mike Miller, they bring back Udonis Haslem, and that's kind of looking like it's going to be the core 5. I should have added this in earlier. Riley did have plans to bring back Jermaine O'Neal, but Jermaine has a wonderful quote about going down and looking at the Oreos, and the Oreos looking at him, and him saying that he's too old to have the debate of whether or not he can eat Oreos. Riley also wanted to bring in Derek Fisher. Neither of those moves ended up happening. The rest of the Heat roster they flesh out with a lot of minimum signs. A lot of guys that used to be all-stars, like 6 years prior, Zydrunas Ilgauskas, Jamal McGlure, Jerry Stackhouse, also bringing back Carlos Arroyo and Mario Chalmers. I think what's really interesting about this first year is the Heat have so many just minimum viable pieces that they end up starting basically everyone except for Udonis Haslem. Literally 13 different players start, including Jerry Stackhouse, who plays just 7 games before getting waived. Udonis Haslem doesn't. Carlos Arroyo starts 42 of his 49 games and then gets waived because Mike Bibby finalizes a buyout from, I believe, the Wizards. Bulls into their first playoffs, starting Zydrunas Ilgauskas and Mike Bibby alongside their. Now, not to defend some of the dropping that we see from some of Miami's stars in the 2011 finals, but the roster construction leaves a lot to be desired, especially as these bodies start breaking down. Ilgauskas breaks down and Udonis Haslem goes from not playing since November to basically 20 minutes a night in the Eastern Conference semis. James Jones had supplanted an injured Mike Miller for the team's most reliable shooter off the bench role. He goes down midway through the Chicago series. Overall, during the 2011 run, there just wasn't a lot to work with. You had to sign guys at the minimums. Some of those picks might have come in handy to trade for slightly better pieces. The 2012 team doesn't have that many notable changes, but the first, Miami drafts Bojan Bogdanovic with one of the picks that they got from Michael Beasley, and then trade him for Norris Cole. And bringing in Shane Battier, a reliable 3-point shooter who can also help defend the other team's best player. The changes between year 1 and year 2 are less about personnel changes and more about sustainable roles for guys. Joel Anthony and Mario Chalmers are able to kind of hold down those starting spots that they earned at the very end of last season. Mike Miller plays better, and Udonis Haslem is healthy for most of the year. And it's enough for them to overcome Chris Bosh missing half of the playoff run, kind of that middle section there. And I think looking back on it, it's a super team because of the big three, but I do think we really overrated the rest of the roster, or at least didn't appreciate how weak the rest of the roster was in and of the moment. The 2013 team only change was the addition and reunification of Ray Allen and Rashard Lewis. I do think it's important to note that this is the start of a recurring trend where this team is old, really old. The only guys below 30 are LeBron, Bosh, Mario Chalmers, and Norris Cole. And so when we get to 2014, the team is collapsing in upon itself. It's just too old to continue this run. The biggest new addition they bring in is Christian Anderson, Birdman, who is 35 and back in the league after drug suspensions. Now, he does bring a ton of energy, lots of rim protection. It's a great acquisition. Miami makes a few other smaller moves, really just a shuffling of the deck chairs. They do bring back Michael Beasley, good to see him back in a Heat uniform. But during the playoffs, they're unable to figure out a consistent lineups, rotating that starting spot between Shane Battier, Udonis Haslem, and Rashard Lewis, as each of those guys also miss some time. That, combined with Dwayne Wade's failing health, leads us into the 2014 offseason, where the Big Three give the Heat an ultimatum to try to make some better moves. LeBron also expresses a strong desire to play with Shabazz Napier, who in fairness had just had a great NCAA tournament run, but wasn't really looking like he was going to be a great pro. And since LeBron's desire to play with him was so well known, everyone kind of knew the Heat were going to take him with the 26th pick. So the Charlotte Bobcats naturally swoop in and take him with the 24th pick, trade him for 2 additional seconds, the 26th pick, and cash. The Heat then spend the next 2 weeks failing to get anyone else, and LeBron goes back and signs with Cleveland. And I think our big takeaway for the Miami years is if you're going to sign somewhere, sign there. Don't get traded for assets. The Mike Miller and Udonis Haslem deals were very tradable. If you had some decent picks, with the flatter salary structure back then, there's a good chance that you could have gotten better pieces. Or if you just made the picks, keeping that Raptors pick, you could have had more young talent and kept the band together longer.